I'd like to start by just saying a word of deep gratitude to everyone who is joining, not just our session, but also this whole conference. It feels like a moment in the world where we are constantly reminded of all the violences that are happening, and they're much more visible to us. And so, what is happening here within the Ecoversities Alliance and this Reimagining Education conference is much more than just about education. And that is the frame that we take in our session, which is thinking not of education itself, but the very idea of learning as an active practice where we are walking a path that is emancipatory, that we have an option to engage with learning as taking us towards freedom, towards liberation. And in that light, this session is organized by the Global Tapestry of Alternatives. It is a global process that is trying to weave radical alternatives from around the world. And I've put the link in the chat. Um, Within the GTA, as we call it, it is about recognizing the destructive hegemonic system, but making way for radical alternatives that nurture life to both be repaired, regenerated, but also new ones to be seeded and come to life during these times. And so we're delighted to talk today with three people who are part of the GTA, who are doing some of the work of weaving grassroots communities, different knowledges, different ways of being in the world together. I also want to acknowledge, and maybe I introduced myself earlier, but also introduce myself again. My name is Vasna Ramasar, and I am one of the founding members of the Global Tapestry of Alternatives. I also want to remind the new people who have joined that we do have interpretation to Spanish if you need it. Um, and then before we go into the details of the session, I want to also acknowledge here that apart from the speakers who will be talking today, also Beatrice Fonsanger, Camila Bos, and Raquel Castillo are here also as members of the GTA. So very delighted to have them, but also all the wisdom that all of you will bring to the session. The idea then is that we want to talk about learning and how learning happens as part of the everyday practices of weaving radical alternatives. And we're very grateful to have with us today three people who will first make interventions on a few questions that we have crafted together. And those are the speakers that we have for today are Melanie Bush, who is from the United States and locates home in the struggle for a more just and loving world, particularly in the build part of resistance through solidarity economy. Our second speaker is Natalia Giraldo Jaramillo, who is a walker and dreamer, weaving hopes and caring for and protecting sacred places and territories. Natalia identifies as an apprentice to Indigenous peoples, local communities, students, academic, and everyday conversations, recognizing nature as her first teacher. And then the third speaker is Wangui Wa Kamonji, who is a regenerative practitioner researching and translating Indigenous African knowledges into experiential processes, art, and honey to provide rooted, embodied tools for us to decolonize and re-indigenize. So Natalia, Wangui, and Melanie will be sharing on three questions that we want to pose in conversation. And we will end the session first with a reflection from Shail Sathi, who started his journey as a bicycle activist, which led him to deeper reflections on the physical landscape and its entanglements with the spiritual within value systems and worldviews. And then we will also hopefully have a bit of time to engage everyone on the questions that we've asked. in anticipation of being able to also bring everyone's thoughts into the conversation, because there is such a richness to everyone in the room, we have created a Padlet, which hopefully you will be able to join, and I have added it into the chat. So around the three questions that we're asking, feel free to put comments either in the chat of this Zoom or on the Padlet, and we will also pick up on everyone's inputs at the end of the session. So with that in mind, three questions, with getting some reflections from each of our speakers for about 10 minutes. And I will start with the first question that we ask to the session, which is really about understanding how learning is embedded in collective processes of weaving. And so I asked to the three of you, in the collectives and networks in which you are embedded and weave, how do we learn in and through everyday interactions and relations? So I'd like to maybe start with asking Natalia if you would like to first introduce a little bit the collectives you weave in, and then also your thoughts on this question. And just a reminder to everyone that we have interpretation for Spanish, which you will need because Natalia will talk in Spanish. Thank you. Or some of you will need. Some of you are better at Spanish than I am. Natalia, I pass it to you.
Bueno, buenas tardes, buenos días, buenas noches. Muchas gracias por el espacio, por estar juntas. Estamos en esta conferencia de reimaginar la educación. Este es el panel, las personas que nos encontramos aquí. Y para responder un poco la primera pregunta de Vasna, ¿cómo se integra ese aprendizaje en nuestro proceso colectivo? Voy a hablarles de una experiencia que se llama el tejido de colectivos Manizales y suroccidente colombiano. Manizales es una ciudad pequeña relativamente al lado de un nevado que se llama Cumanday. Ahí existen los mercados populares, el mercado de plantas medicinales, también hay mercados de cosas de segunda, mercados de mucho tipo, es lo que nosotros llamamos una galería, que en otros países es una feria y que no tiene que ver con las galerías de arte, pero que en castellano decimos galería. Ahí está la Universidad de la Tierra, como les comento, y la idea es que ustedes puedan explorar más esta apuesta de la Universidad de la Tierra yendo a la página de internet. En la Universidad de la Tierra trabajamos conversaciones todos los miércoles abiertas, hacemos programaciones cada 2, 3 meses de qué quieren hablar los colectivos de la ciudad, qué es lo que se está haciendo, por eso es la cotidianidad. Es una universidad de la emergencia, ¿sí? No son planes, programas, digamos, a largo plazo, sino que es lo que esté sucediendo en el momento. Por ejemplo, ahora, digamos, tenemos las guerras o el contexto de las guerras, o pasa algo en el Cauca, en el caso de Colombia, o la coyuntura de las elecciones. Entonces, todo eso vamos conversando de acuerdo a lo que los colectivos queramos conversar. Junto a la Unitierra está la editorial Color Tierra también, que son coautorías liberadas. Hay un texto hecho con el TGA también, que es Pluritopías en Color Tierra. Tenemos esas conversas por video, grabadas, algunas por Facebook. Son conversas que se hacen totalmente abiertas en la ciudad. También un postdoctorado de transindisciplinaridades, es decir, más que disciplinar, se habla de las indisciplinas. Esto es otra academia, por eso no le decimos, digamos, como una universidad convencional, es una universidad legítima, más no necesariamente legal. Bueno, eso para responder la primera pregunta. Gracias.
Thank you, Natalia. Melanie, would you like to go next?
Sure, I can. And the particular context that I'm referencing is the hyperlocal work that I do in Flatbush Central Brooklyn in New York. And it was funny because even in thinking about how to prepare for this discussion, I wanted it not just to be my own thoughts. So I posed the question, which then actually gave me some example of how is learning embedded in our collective process and organizing. What I found is that what people said is, I'm not really sure I know learning and freedom, but I know learning. And that learning a lot in our context has to do with listening and building relationships. That learning has to do in the collective process with recognizing that we each come into the space with our lived experience, our particularities, our positionalities. And one other person said, oh, what I've really learned most in our collective process is that the collective process works and that we're the ones. And if we each give our all, not as the central person, but as a voice in figuring out how to both address the deep needs of our communities, um, and be responsive, but also build to the future that we can. People are here because the collective process, organizing and learning has happened. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. So that's enough for me.
Thank you, Melanie. Wangui?
So good to be with you all. I love that one of the learnings is that the collective process actually works. The spaces that I am within and where I do weaving are actually very related and linked to the Ecoversities Alliance primarily. So I'm regional weaver in the Ecoversities Alliance for the Africa region. And I also run a space, an ecoversity called From the Roots. I usually prefer to call it an organism because it is a very much alive being as well. And so in that sense, all of the things that I do in the weaving that I do are already engaged with learning and unlearning. And I kind of want to bring this piece of unlearning a bit more in this moment. So the spaces that we create within the regional ecoversities spaces are co-learning sessions within the Africa region, so that within the region we can share the knowledge and see ourselves as also abundant and resourced and resourceful, share the knowledge that we have within the region, across the region with people from diverse countries. And then regional gatherings, which is a methodology, a relational methodology of the Ecoversities Alliance to always bring people together, because relationship is what actually is at the base of how we do everything at the Ecoversities Alliance. And then is also at the base of how we will build new worlds, right? So within these spaces, and then within From the Roots, which is the space that I curate, unlearning and learning will be through courses, through publications, through a community of practice where it's kind of easygoing. We can create skill shares. So there's a lot of like sharing of what we already know. And what is coming to me about unlearning is how we create conditions at the edge of what we are used to, at the edge of what the dominant systems have entrained in us, so that we invite people to go beyond those edges, to meet those edges, and together with that, creating a container and the resources to support people in that sense. So a small example, for example, in our recent regional gathering, one of the activities that we were going to do was to have a collective tree planting ceremony, bringing soil from different countries across the continent in order to plant and pray for solidarity, plant and pray for peace, plant and pray for the barriers that prevent us from knowing each other, very intentional barriers set up by colonial systems, for those to melt, to dissolve, for us to have much more capacity to transcend them. And then we collectively planted a tree. one of the asks was for people to bring soil with them. And one of the participants had a moment of confronting, oh man, I didn't bring soil. And in that moment, what comes up is that sense of like, I'm about to be punished because I didn't do the thing that I was asked to do, which is a very colonial schooling entrainment, right? And so that was just like a micro moment in which we could do the unlearning, in which we could meet that moment with like, oh, let's invite a different way to be with this. Let's invite a more expansive way to be with this situation in which you're confronting, you didn't do the thing that folks had been asked to do. And in a way that goes beyond punishment, how do we create learning in those moments? So this is the methodologies and the ways in which learning, and really particularly unlearning, is embedded in how we do weaving.
Thank you, Wangu. I think that's an important point, that we have to do the work of unlearning, that there is so much of that work required if we actually want to find emancipatory pathways and think about doing so in freedom. I think also for us in the Global Tapestry of Alternatives, centering the way that we nourish and nurture radical alternatives, alternatives built in the collective, in community, in the work that is happening with the soil, is also really important. And so the second question that I would like to pose to the three panelists is, how do we do this unlearning? How do we free ourselves from the compartmentalized concepts of learning and schooling? And how does this start to work in terms of our practices of alternatives? So, really reintegrating life and learning together rather than focused on sort of the institution of education. And this time around, we start with you, Melanie.
So again, this is also from Marcia Small, Bilal Ndongo, Khalid Richards, and Corey Eubanks. How we do it a lot is about building the relationships and listening really hard, being open to consider how the world looks in everyday practice through different lived experiences, and that it is a very active and paced process. It is also something that I was thinking a lot about last night. It's a process that means that we be present and patient with ourselves and with each other, that if we're going to incorporate learning in our everyday, then it also means sharing honestly and knowing or building the connections with each other so that we know that we can have vastly different ways of seeing something and be engaged in consideration. But it means that we all need to show up with authenticity. And that's something that I think essential to this in the how is about being patient with the process, because we can't learn from each other if we feel, and I don't entirely ascribe to the notion that any of us is safe in this system, in this world, but that we build the community, we build the relationships, we build the initiatives that Vasna, you and I were talking a little bit about, that become sustainable through, okay, one initiative may come and go or reshape, one formation may come and go or reshape, but it's the basis of the relationship that will, and learning from each other and learning from the synergy that comes to make something beautiful that's not just through one lens or one moment. And I think that's my offering.
Thank you, Melanie. I think really this idea that it is not a textbook sort of work where we pick up a book or a computer and it's about actually the human to human. It's the human to the more than human. It's the connection and relationality, such a critical point. Wangui?
Maybe I'll pick up from just where you left, Vasna. This has been critical in the spaces I'm weaving, I'm curating, bringing back the more than human. And I think I'll say a bit more about it, perhaps with the third question. But, starting off from what were the forms of learning and schooling that we went through and what did they do to us? And where I am in East Africa, the forms of learning and schooling, some of the critical things that they did to us, one, like removing any sense of connecting with the more than human beyond a very Cartesian way of like, these are resources. So trees are resources, mountains are resources, anything else, any other being on this earth is looked at just as a resources for us to extract from. So that's already one place to do some reversal, to do some healing, right? And that comes through in the ways that we curate spaces. So, for example, having lots of ceremonies, having very intentional ways of entering a space, greeting the lambs when we arrive in a place, saying goodbye in ceremony, honoring the land in different ways while we are present. And then also honoring the people's bodies, right? So the colonial schooling in my context is very much mental focused and building the mind, and the body only comes in if it's like, oh, something else that we can also, it will bring you a prize, it will bring you some money, through sports or something like this. So those are the few places when the body comes in, or through, we had in high school, we had these what are they called? Like a school drama festival, school music festival. So it's about prestige. It's about, competition also. It's about who gets to go out, of schools because our schools are mostly boarding schools. So reversing this perspective of both the more than human and also our own bodies and valuing the rest or much more of who we are as beings in any space that we create and we curate. I can say a bit more about that, but I really want to actually speak about value because in my reflections about what colonial schooling has done to African bodies, it has often just come around, what is this word? Circled around this question of value and around this question of devaluation, that an African body is just to be extracted from and to be used to create value for somebody else. And so, in the spaces that I weave within, there is such an explicit going against that. And I'll give a few examples. Like for us within From the Roots, and sorry, it's making me emotional because it's something that I really, really feel truly. In the space that we curate, one of the values within From the Roots is beauty. Why beauty? Because beauty is a marker of value. And so any space that we curate as From the Roots will have beauty as a marker. We'll have, like cloths that are patterned beautifully that come from this region. We'll have, food laid out in a very beautiful way. We'll have extravagant, exuberant care. Because it's an intention to reverse that devaluation, to speak back value into African bodies. I actually also want to, if I may, just like share one image. For example, this was not pictures that I took. These were pictures taken by students in my classes of the meals that we usually have within spaces that I curate. And one of the things that I wanted to share with sharing these images is like there's this there's a principle that the food that we will have will be nourishing, will be yummy, and it will bring through a reimagination of what we can do with our own local ingredients. So on all these levels, like we're restoring value to the people, we're restoring value to our own indigenous ingredients, and just like really centralizing also the place of food, food as an alive being, food as collaborator and co-facilitator also, that the learning is not just coming through what the, quote unquote, main facilitator is going to be bringing into the space. Food is also a facilitator, just as much as land is a facilitator. The trees outside are facilitators, the soil is facilitator. So this is some of what I want to share for this.
Thank you, Wangui, both for speaking and naming the traumas, the pains, that's also things that are specific to some violences that not everyone can know and have experienced, and that we have to be able to recognize that there are different kinds of learning, unlearning, valuing beauty that we need to bring in different places. I have to say, looking at the food just like takes me back home as well. And I was like, it just also brings that warmth of like, yes, that is my community. That food is, as much a part of my community as the people. Thank you for that. Natalia?
Sí, contarles un poco, espérate que quiero compartir también las imágenes. Em, Nuestra primer gran madre, gran profesora, gran maestra es la naturaleza. No me presenté en un principio, yo soy colombiana, en este momento vivo en Ámsterdam, gracias a estas también pluriversidades, a los caminos de las pluriversidades que caminamos. Hay toda una crítica a la educación convencional, también a la etnoeducación, porque es una educación de afuera de las comunidades hacia adentro de las comunidades y no de adentro de las comunidades hacia afuera. Con estas pluriversidades, nosotros estamos caminando en este momento con el pueblo indígena en la Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, en Colombia, que se llama Gonavindúa. Pueblo indígena es Ik, Arhuaco, se conoce, digamos, generalmente. Creo que la mayoría de personas han conocido primero las mochilas de los arhuacos antes que, digamos, a los indígenas como tal, porque estas mochilas las portamos, digamos, varias personas con todo ese aprendizaje que tienen las mujeres tejedoras de la Sierra Nevada, que están tejiendo el territorio en sus mochilas. Estas, digamos, lo que nosotros estimulamos acá es las autonomías en los aprendizajes y, como les decía, el territorio es nuestra primera maestra. Si sanamos el territorio, sanamos todos, nos dice Seinabiku. Él es de la familia del Mamo que ustedes ven en este momento. El Mamo Arhuabiku es una visita que hizo el Mamo a Países Bajos, porque en cualquier lugar de la Tierra y del planeta hay lugares sagrados, y esas son nuestras primeras universidades, nuestros primeros salones de clase. Debemos empezar a ver esos lugares. La invitación no es ir a las comunidades, no es ir a la Sierra Nevada, no es ir al Cusco, al ombligo del mundo, ni al corazón, sino es descubrirlo acá, en lo que tenemos, dónde está la naturaleza. Por ejemplo, en Ámsterdam, una ciudad completamente transformada, digamos, por la mano del ser humano, pero la naturaleza obvio que está en las mismas estaciones que estamos viviendo ahorita, pasando a la primavera, y el Mamo empieza a ver estos lugares sagrados, a explicarle a las personas que viven acá, y empieza a explicarse cómo desde esta pedagogía indígena, que es la pedagogía de las raíces, la que hablaba Wangui, que es una pedagogía de la tierra, tiene que ver con la comida, con lo sagrado, con los lugares, con el territorio, y por eso las comunidades enraizadas son las grandes defensoras del territorio. Es decir, ellos y ellas son nuestros grandes maestros en la protección y en todas esas crisis que tenemos ahorita, la crisis climática, la crisis ambiental, la crisis civilizatoria, son ellos y ellas quienes son nuestros maestros. Entonces, invitarlas también de pronto a ver un poco más este escrito, donde hay frases y conversaciones, historias del Mamo Arhuabicu, también de Seinabicu, contándonos por qué la educación propia es una educación más fuerte, enraizada, y desde ahí sí ver a Occidente, no al revés, no que nos lleven a Occidente a los territorios. Nosotros miramos Occidente. ¿Desde dónde? Por ejemplo, decía otro indígena, Gunadule, Abadio Green Stossel, que ahora hace parte también del Ministerio de Educación en este tema de las universidades indígenas en Colombia, como la palabra avión significa pájaro de metal que vuela, ¿sí? Porque está en su idioma, en el Gunadule, y es la interpretación a partir de eso. ¿Qué pasa con ese metal? ¿Qué significa metal, digamos, en el Gunadule, en los idiomas indígenas? Cada idioma indígena tiene toda esta sabiduría de la tierra, tiene las comidas, tiene los cantos de los pájaros, tiene los sonidos del agua. En el caso de los Kamsá, sus apellidos, sus nombres, tiene que ver con los ríos, y esas son, digamos, como las terminaciones de las palabras que hay allí. Entonces creo que la universidad la tenemos diariamente en la vida, soy la primera estudiante, como les digo, por eso estoy por acá también, y es más como escuchar, leer y tener ese sentimiento y ese corazón allí para poder expresarnos y estar con los otros y otras y aprender en los diferentes escenarios y saber que la academia es solo un espacio más de encuentro, pero no es el mejor ni el que tiene la verdad. Gracias.
Thank you, Natalia. And I think the last point you made is also really important, that the academy might not be the best one because it is learning from within communities, not from outside and then imposing. And so, what does that mean in terms of how we weave radical alternatives? How do we share that learning? That it's not always a formal process, but that it's a process that is built step by step, as Melanie said, through the patience and the work that we all do. Which brings me then to the last question. And in some ways, I think you have all already started to answer it, but it's really just to think about each of you is doing this work, and so I imagine are many of the participants in this session. And what can you learn from how you work, where you work, who you work with? But just, yeah, what can we share about doing this kind of work, especially in terms of opening up the possibilities of creating a pluriverse, a world where many worlds fit together? So, Wangui, if we could start with you.
So I want to bring two things. One is this, one of the postures with which we move within from the roots is humility and honesty. And I think in being in learning and unlearning spaces, it's something that is constantly coming through. And humility and honesty is a posture that has a relationship with truth. One of the things that I think I'm seeing in my mind, this image of like a thread that goes, like crisscrossing, if we were in a circle, just many multiple threads from each of us crisscrossing across the circle. And I think this is one of the things that I have learned, and I think is there to be learned when you embrace this way of learning, unlearning, and integrate it within how one weaves and how we weave our communities, how we weave life back into our communities as well. And for me, this is particularly speaking to that the learning is not in one direction. The learning is in multiple directions and it's constantly happening. And so to be aware or attuned to when that learning is happening. For me, one of these moments is like one of my learnings, for example, from this most recent regional gathering that we held was that there's no such thing as wasted time. And even the concept of wasted time comes from coloniality. Like, how can you waste time? It's not possible. And we were in Benin, and some things just would have delays to begin. Like, okay, the buses are not yet here, or they're not yet ready for us to go on a site visit, or yes, we already placed our order for lunch as we go somewhere, but we get there and it's not ready. And as an organizer, you can begin to become frustrated in those moments. And what I actually learned from, observing multiple of those moments happening was like, oh, wait, what is this creating the possibility for? And it's creating the possibility for people to have conversations, for some people to rest some more because they were like, I'm not coming at that time. I'm going to sleep more. It's creating a possibility for something that I haven't imagined, right? And so I don't have, as facilitator or as curator, as inviter, do not have gosh, it's the Kiswahili word that's in my mind right now. I don't have the mamlaka on like all of the possible possibilities that can occur in any one moment. And so that teaches me humility, and that teaches me, or like reconfirms, that learning is always happening in multiple directions, in multiple ways, from multiple people. And as the metric is actually, again, relationship. So if a moment did not go in the way that you wanted it to go, but that it allowed for a relationship to be seeded, a conversation to happen that would not have otherwise happened, two people to see each other in a moment that might not have otherwise happened, then it was successful. So this is like one of the things, right? So that unlearning is happening everywhere, and it's happening. It's not just like the province of like, oh, the people who came to attend the thing, or the people who you're curating for, like the quote unquote students. No, it's for everybody, including the people who are quote unquote organizing. And the other piece for me is linked to this, which is to learn how to partner with the more than human in weaving. Um, so, even to do that thing of like, okay, something else might be wanting to happen here where I might want, like for the buses to be ready so that we can all go right now. But perhaps something else is wanting to happen. And so learning how to take direction from the more than human. And for me, this begins way before you even get to the moment. In the way that I weave, in the way that we weave, it begins from conceptualizing the space. It begins from actually creating and dreaming the space, creating and dreaming the container, so that that container is not held only by the human. The human is insufficient. Truly, truly, the human is insufficient. And so for me, for example, this can look like having conversations with the spirit of the gathering, for example, like if we're going to have a gathering where we're inviting people to come, having a conversation with the spirit of the gathering before. What do you want for this gathering? What might be challenges? What will be important to focus on? How do we take care of each other before? And it gives so much rest to the human organizer, and it gives a point of continuous conversation with the more than human when you have done this before. It also curates much more safety in the space, much more safety to know like, okay, yeah, I can actually rest back and allow for something else to happen. So that humility comes back again, that humility that I don't have all dominion on all the possibilities possible in any moment. And since we are partnering, and since we are like curating, we are weaving towards more life, we are weaving towards the pluriverse, making that space, right? Stepping back, allowing for that space for the more than human to shape and to influence. I had this description, I'll end with this description of what it means to be in partnership, to be open to be influenced. And so that softness, that I can be open to be influenced, that whatever it is we are curating, we are organizing, we are wanting to bring into the world, it is open to be influenced by the more than human, by also forces that I don't know. and to be also playful with that, like, okay, what else might be trying to happen here, and not get frustrated, right? Because then you can get frustrated if you are unorganized. Yeah, I'll share those for now.
Thanks, Wangui. I think, you speak about the openness and softness, which is in direct contrast to the kind of control of time, of places, of, yeah, beings that we try to do all the time. Um, and Melanie, would you like to continue?
Thank you, Angui. I love it. I will try to add and rather than repeat. One of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is how the violence of the schooling experience, oftentimes, for example, in the community that uh, I'm most deeply connected with, leads people to say, I want to do the work and away from the reflection process. And I think that one of the lessons is learning how learning and unlearning can happen, where it's the community itself that's reclaiming that process. And it's not something that's imposed from above. And so that everybody recognizes their own contribution to our collective growth and learning. And also of course, in terms of learning from the more than human, that openness to be influenced and shaped and reshaped, that gets away from the either ors and the binaries and the oppositions, but really embraces, um, people sometimes talk about negativity, positivity, but embrace imagination, embrace creativity, embrace our own power, really, to to learn and grow and not be stuck in this world that's been imposed upon us. And I think in doing that, it also means that we've grown up within this world and need to also recognize and navigate the power dynamics that come, that I struggle with this concept of intentionality, but being intentional in a sense about recognizing, we've breathed, all of us, and each of us in different ways because of our locations, but we've all breathed this system, and how to break away, how to use our learning and centering in community and in the much broader understanding of existence, to grow together. Um, so I think that the issue of what you were saying about the openness and the softness, it's in a way the momentum of growth.
Bueno, para también conversar con lo que dijeron Wangu y Melanie, lo que ha dicho Vasna y abrir también más la conversación. Este enredarnos, este estar en red, en tejido, en micelio, ya sabemos ahora, como decían también en el chat, hacer parientes, ¿sí? Estamos haciendo parientes donde vamos, humanos, no humanos, más que humanos también. Ahí entran también los seres espirituales, como les comentaba, los lugares sagrados y cómo todos estos encuentros entre comunidades se van tejiendo. Les contaba la primera experiencia de la Unitierra y cómo con la Unitierra en estas conversaciones llegan diferentes grupos, diferentes personas, luego esos grupos vamos a los territorios y este es un ejemplo de una de las conversas en el pabellón de las ramas de las plantas medicinales en la Galería de Manizales, se llamó Cartobordando el Territorio, es decir, cartografías tejidas, ¿sí? En este caso son cartografías de montaña, Cuando ellos fueron allí, yo les hablé de la comunidad indígena de Taganga, de pescadores ancestrales, y luego fueron y surgió cartobordando el maritorio. Nosotros no solo hablamos del territorio, hablamos de la maritorio, digamos, porque en castellano mar es supuestamente, según la Real Academia de la Lengua Española, es masculino, el mar. Pero la verdad es que los poetas, las personas de las comunidades, las personas más cercanas le dicen la mar, ¿sí? Y se entiende más, por ejemplo, en el francés o el alemán, que no tiene, digamos, un género para el mar en sí mismo, pero en castellano sí. Entonces hemos hecho énfasis en la mar, en ese maritorio, porque no es solo un territorio, la explotación de la naturaleza está llegando y ya ha estado hace mucho tiempo, el mismo Internet y lo que estamos haciendo acá va por debajo de la mar, las extracciones que están allí, los indígenas de mar en Colombia no casi se conocían, solo digamos los guayú, pero no se entienden. Entonces todos estos son otras formas, digamos, de lenguajear el territorio, como diría Maturana también, el biólogo de la autopoiesis, que ya vamos hablando es de simpoiesis, ¿no? Con Donna Haraway y otras personas que están allí hablando de lo que estábamos hablando. Haz parientes, no sé, la otra parte creo que a las comunidades tradicionales no está tan bien, ¿no? Cuando ella dice no bebés, ¿sí? Porque también tenemos que pensar en esa otra humanidad que está allí. En estos encuentros con la Unitierra, también estamos cocinando en este momento un libro en la editorial Color Tierra con Pocho Daniels, que es pescador, y su hermana, que es Ledis Daniels. Es un libro hecho de oralitura, ¿sí? Es una escritura que nos sirve, pero para darle sustento a la oralidad y no al revés, ¿sí? O sea, la oralidad ha sido negada y violentada por la escritura. Entonces, es momento en que esa oralidad también se retome cada vez más y que la escritura pueda servirle a ella, más no violentarla. Entonces, estas son escrituras orales, oralitura, la ha llamado un poeta chileno, y desde ahí hay toda una serie de poetas indígenas que están acá recordándonos esta parte de la oralitura. Estamos ayudando a tejer este documento como un chinchorro, como un texto, un tejido, y está abierto para todas las que estamos acá, los que estamos acá también. Si queremos contribuir que esto salga a la luz, está apenas en el proceso editorial. Así se teje, digamos, estos libros de la editorial Color Tierra y el proceso de la Unitierra también. Tenemos entonces al final, pues aprender haciendo, ya nos lo han dicho los mayores hace mucho tiempo, vivir sintiendo en el encuentro, somos esas tramas, esas urdimbres, y como nos decía el Mamo Arhuabicu, también en un lugar sagrado, siento, no, él decía, pienso, luego existo. ¿Cómo los occidentales dicen eso? Pienso, luego existo. Si uno hace, piensa, existe, siente, ¿no? Entonces es la reducción que tenemos también en esa filosofía occidental que nos ha puesto esto, y no solo a las personas que nacieron en Europa, sino todo, digamos, el globo donde nos ha llegado la educación occidental, y por eso regreso al desaprender que decían en un comienzo y que también Juan Gui nos habló, para poder abrir estos sentimientos, este corazón, dejarnos afectar también, como dicen otros, digamos, en la filosofía, Spinoza, pero también estaban hablando, digamos, de influenciar para que se den estas cosas, que era lo que les quería mostrar, cómo de procesos, espacios de conversación, llegamos a caminos con comunidades que llegan a esas conversaciones, luego van a los otros lados, ¿sí? Y esos son, digamos, los procesos que ahora se tejen en la Unitierra y en las pluriversidades de la vida, de la mar, de la madre. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Natalia. There's so much richness in everything everyone has shared, and I want to also appreciate the inputs that people are making in the chat as well. Also very powerful. Unfortunately, we live with the time constraints, but I see this that this conference, this work that is happening is one single conversation that is simply moving in different directions with different people. Unfortunately, we will have to end in about 10 minutes' time, but it is only just a continuous conversation to my mind that we move with into the other sessions that to come. In the last 10 minutes, though, I do want to give a moment for a reflection about what we've talked about. So to give the floor to Shail to also just share some thoughts on all the contributions that people have made. So I will invite Shail into the conversation as well.
Thank you, Vasna, and thank you everyone for the contribution to this conversation. I hope I'm clearly being heard. I'll just repeat some of the phrases without, putting them independently, and then so that if there is 5 minutes more for other conversations, and I'm sorry I've not been able to look at the chat, so I will not be covering that. But the University of Emergency and War and space where we can experience the discussions and conversations the collective is doing. And about one way of learning to be understanding how unlearning happens. And the learning to meet and go beyond the aces, to break the barriers of the colonial construct, to build with soil and plant and pray for solidarity. Learning through building relationship and listening hard and experiencing lived experiences. Sharing with honesty, accepting differences, being patient with the process, learning through the synergy. Beyond the books, learning people to people and from more than humans. Learning from the land and spaces and body through ceremonies as a process, and the learning through weaving. Realizing that body as a competition or a objective of prestige and prize as a colonial construct, and learning through working in values, through beauty as a marker of value, food as a symbol of beauty and care, food as a learning facilitator as much as the soil and the land. Wow, they're all so powerful, independently and weave together so well. Realizing that Mother Earth, land is the first teacher and life is the first student as a process of learning. Realizing that the conventional education is sourced out of the community and in weaving learning that happens from within as a process and the learning itself. Realizing that land and mountain as a sacred territory is the learning space, and realizing that academy may be one of them, but not the best place to learn from. Humility and honesty as an element on how do we spread this ahead through relationships, and realizing that learning doesn't happen in a unidirection and it's always multidirectional, and believing in learning that happens beyond humans and realizing that human is insufficient, and how that creates sense of security for us to learn realizing that Western time is a colonial construct and building beyond it. And I love the example of oral writing and how such an experience and a process of writing a book for a fisherman can be a way of living towards a blue rivers as a learning process. I just brought them all together because they were all beautiful and independent, and I wanted to be slow in reading this. I want to pass it on without conclusion and keeping them all open and free. Thank you. Back to you, Vas.
Thank you, Shail. Yes, just the reminders of, that the power is there in so many ways. I'm not sure how. Our hope was to also have a little bit of space for some questions, comments, reflections from everyone in the room. I don't know if our dear host is going to kick us out exactly, or if there will be a chance for a little bit of
No,
little.
no, I think we can stay for 10 more minutes if people are interested in Q&A.
Thank you very much. So then I would like to really open the floor to everyone. If people would like to make a comment, ask a question, just share. Now is the moment to do this. Raquel, please go ahead.
Yeah, just a little bit. In the earlier discussion, there are questions posted by Vasna, and the questions asked, how is the learning, embedded in the weaving, and in the weaving, what we are actually doing in our work is really creating movements for change. And you cannot do alternatives if you are by yourself. Just it needs many people to come together and be a movement. But that is why the kinds of learning that you have all described are very important, because movements do not win when they are pure, but when they are broad. And I think that we should also bring in, also in our discussions and for consideration, how to be broad is also intergenerational learning and also intersectoral learning, because then we will not be like how we are often, how they often picture how we, for example, describe what an elephant is by just touching one part of it, but not really experiencing the whole of it. But if we are a community and we are all together, and different sectors of us can do the cross learning, and therefore this makes us strong, so that we can do our radical alternatives. So those are my reflections from all of the conversations and sharings that you have given. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Raquel. We have 3 other hands, so also just to make sure we have space for everyone who wants to input, if we can also try to keep it a little bit short and succinct. Again, being controlled by colonial time, but that's how it is, unfortunately, right now. We continue these conversations in many spaces. Adriana?
Saka Evarisi Dama Machi, Buenas tardes, compañeros y compañeras en todas partes del mundo. Muchísimas gracias por la palabra dulce que se siembra acá. Gracias a la compañera Natalia, porque es una de las personas que nos ha venido acompañando en las comunidades durante muchísimo tiempo. En Colombia, yo desde este momento les hablo desde la Selva Negra de Alemania, como mujer en Vera que soy, indígena, y que trabajo educación indígena propia en territorio. Me parece que es fundamental encontrar que hayan tejidos similares en todas partes del mundo. Me identifico mucho con la compañera que habló de la humildad. Tenemos que entender que no estamos solos en esta tierra, que somos seres que estamos en comunión con otros seres vivientes y espíritus, que no podemos apropiarnos, que no podemos imponernos y que la educación no debe ser nunca un sistema de imposición, sino un sistema para que las personas sigan siendo libres y quizás de esa manera podemos ayudar a salvar a las nuevas generaciones de tantas depresiones que se están viviendo. Es importante entender que la semilla no se siembra hoy y se cosecha mañana, que tiene un tiempo y que nuestro territorio siempre va a ser nuestro primer maestro y la madre y la tierra nuestra gran madre que nos acoge y nos enseña, con la humildad que tenemos para entender que no podemos estar extrayéndole todo lo que nos da y que tenemos que aprender a dar y a recibir. Es importante también entender que la memoria de los pueblos se teje en comunidad y a través de la palabra, y la palabra siempre será la memoria nuestra. Muchas gracias, Arakiroma.
Thank you, Adriana. Yayo?
Gracias. También voy a hablar en español, aprovechando a Bruno, porque es un privilegio tejerse en su idioma cada quien. Yo creo que lo que acaba de decir la compañera Adriana es fundamental. Hay muchas iniciativas ya en el mundo demostrando cómo el sistema en el que vivimos hoy es obsoleto, pero necesitamos hacerlas visibles para que otros puedan darse cuenta de eso, para que otras puedan también inspirarse y generar sus alternativas. Y creo que hace muchos años las unitierras empezaron un pequeño experimento de ver qué pasa si soltamos el nombre y la forma de aprender en el mundo. Y ahora veo ecoversidades, the Global Tapestry of Alternatives, the Mergers Network, muchas transition networks, like redes por todos lados, tejiendo cosas iguales. Y entonces me da mucho gusto tener en este evento un tejido de alternativas tejiéndose en otro tejido de alternativas, porque así es como vamos creciendo, dicen los zapatistas. Somos pocos, pero ya vamos siendo más. Gracias.
Thank you, Yayo. Keegan?
Aloha, everyone. Thank you so much for sharing and being part of this discussion. It's very important. And I want to say that, just offer the reflection that it's this wonderful that we can gather together like this in virtual. And I'm here to make the effort, because it is extra effort for us to gather in person on the land, but it's so much more rewarding. So I'm on a mission to create more opportunities to do that, and looking forward to connect with people who are willing to go the distance, to make the bridges, connections, to bring our global village tapestry together. Now I'm at the Net Positive Village in Florida, and this is an initiative to build 1 million villages in the next 20 years. And these are places to experiment and birth together the reimagined educational system. So I will leave a link to know more about that. Looking forward to connect and collaborate with each one of you. And also I'm here as a student in Gaia University, so I'm excited to further develop that educational initiative and tie it in wherever it's meant to.
Thank you, Keegan. And also, it's an invitation to everyone who's here Please do share links in the chat to initiatives you're part of, to groups or things that inspire you, because this is also about the collective wisdom. It's not to keep something just to one group, but how we share, how we learn together and from each other. Is there anyone else who would like to share some final thoughts before we close?
Vasna, there is a question in the chat from Kristen.
Yeah, I think maybe I missed that. So is this the question, when creating alternatives, what has especially inspired or supported you? Mentors, spiritual imagery, resources, giving yourself and community the opposite of what was offered in your schooling. And actually, that's a beautiful question, if that's the one, Wangui. Is that right? It's a beautiful question because it would be fantastic for people to share some of those things. And I'm not going to just ask our speakers, but anyone who would like to share, in response to Kristen's question. When creating alternatives, what has inspired and supported you? Anyone want to add, say something?
I can say one thing which relates to what Yayo was also speaking to, which is the networks and, the Global Tapestry of Alternatives, the Ecoversities Alliance. There is that sense of I'm not alone, but also a sense of expansive vision, mission, intention in the world that nourishes you, you get nourished by. I think that has been really critical. One of the biggest challenges with alternatives is that it can often feel like you're just you alone doing your small thing somewhere in a small corner of the world. But once you link up with others, also speaking to what Raquel brought in, then you're no longer alone. You actually see the sense of movement. You see the sense of, this is actually the purpose that we're bringing into the world. So link up with people.
Exactly. Let's connect. Roy.
I put a couple notes in the chat, but yeah, I mean, I've been doing restorative justice work for almost 20 years and primarily grounded in the circle practice, which is itself grounded in the medicine wheel teachings. And I'm sure people here are familiar with it. So for me, it's been very meaningful learning. It's an ongoing learning process. I've done a lot of this work in schools in the Boston area, Boston public schools, which are, typical kind of traditional American schools, very top-down, authoritarian type of systems. And so here we are, like creating, for years, we've been trying to create non-hierarchical systems that honor the wisdom of our young people. And when you do that, it's amazing. I mean, they really embrace it, they enjoy it, and they are not used to it. So you have to kind of acclimate them to this idea of like, okay, we're making decisions by consensus. We are creating our community agreements together. Not our voice over yours as adults, but actually working children and adults together in collaboration. And it's a wonderful thing to share with them. I think it's also kind of anti-tech. I never or very rarely or never really have to tell a student to put their phone away. They actually really, which teachers completely complain about constantly. Oh, the phones. In Circle, the students actually are very excited to not have their phones, to look each other in the eyes, look each other one to one. Sometimes I joke and say we're giving them the skills of having a conversation in person because they don't actually have it that often, sadly, in their lives, where you can slow down and have a deep, meaningful conversation. So yeah, I mean, it's work I'm very passionate about. But I think for me, this conference has been inspiring to, one, see all the wonderful work happening around the world, but also for me to think about ways to better, to go deeper actually with my circles, and really thinking about harmonies with nature, which I know is part of the practice, the teaching practice, but I haven't necessarily been able to bridge that in a experiential way. So I'm still trying to figure that out. But
Yeah, thank
certainly the
you.
idea of, yeah, sure. Thank you so much.
I would also invite you to connect with Bangui and so many other good people here who are meeting some of those challenges of connecting with nature and more than
Yeah.
human life. Um, I am sorry I had to cut you off a bit, Roy, but we are already over time, and I have to first acknowledge and show great gratitude to Bruno, who has been doing the interpretation and doing it over the time that we agreed to. So thank you so much, Bruno, for always being there to try and make sure we have linguistic justice. And hopefully we can do more of it in the future. We have saved the chat. We will also try and transcribe the conversations because, yes, this is not an end, but this is us just opening up to continue these conversations with the people in this room, with many other people outside it, within Ecoversities Alliance, within Global Tapestry of Alternatives, all of the spaces we can. But what I hope is that wherever you are in the world, whether it's morning or night, or middle of the day, that you take some of the wonderful gifts that have been offered by our speakers, but also everyone who's participated, and go forward in terms of how we learn with care, with humility, with sharing, and in collaboration. Thank you, everyone, for being here with us today.